Aujourd'hui, plus de 8% de la population mondiale a pris des psychotropes, cautionnés par une pseudo-science et approuvés par des experts corrompus, rapportant par an près de 27 milliards de dollars. En trouvant le moyen de diagnostiquer des troubles chez tous afin de les droguer, les psychiatres poursuivaient leurs attaques contre nos libertés les plus fondamentales. Les psychiatres réclament le droit absolu de décider de ce qui convient le mieux aux soi-disant malades mentaux. Après tout, les malades mentaux sont fous et incapables de choisir leur propre traitement. Pour imposer leur pouvoir sur les autres et garantir que le taux d'occupation de leurs établissements est rentable, les psychiatres utilisent l'internement d'office.
When you go to a real doctor, say a family doctor or a cardiologist, a patient always has the right to refuse treatment. So there is no such thing as involuntary treatment when it comes to clinical medicine as practiced by real doctors. Psychiatrists, of course, believe that people can be treated against their will.
En 1956, le psychiatre Winfred Overholzer a présenté au Congrès américain un projet proposant d'amener l'internement d'office à un tout autre niveau. Ce projet, acheter un demi-million d'hectares de terres sauvages en Alaska, construire un immense hôpital psychiatrique et changer les lois sur l'internement de sorte que n'importe qui pourrait y être envoyé sur un signe de tête d'un psychiatre. Le projet de loi a été approuvé par la Chambre des représentants. Mais lorsque le public a eu vent de ce projet, qu'il a appelé Sibérie des États-Unis, il était furieux. Ce projet a aussitôt été attaqué par le Sénat. Mais si l'échec du projet de loi Sibérie avait mis un frein au plan de grande envergure, l'internement d'office restait toujours la méthode la plus efficace et la plus rentable pour remplir les établissements psychiatriques.
Again, the person has committed no crime and has no trial and is sent directly to a mental hospital, which is really a prison.
How many people go to an insane asylum and say, please lock me up? Doctors don't lock up anybody. Psychiatrists lock you up.
Même les enfants peuvent être séparés de leurs parents, avec peu de chances de recours.
They just invaded our home. They came in with officers. Our kids were scared. You know, they come in with pieces of paper and say, you're giving us your kids. And it's like, you know, how can they just come in and do that?
She said, you could be arrested for medical neglect. And I said, but how was that when, you know, this is my child? And I see that he doesn't need that much medication. Why would you threaten me with something like that?
At 10 p.m., 2 policemen and 2 social workers came to my house and took all 4 of my kids away.
Une fois internés dans les hôpitaux psychiatriques, les patients sont drogués et mis sous contention.
The more a person objects, the more this objection is construed as symptom of a mental illness.
At which point the person would be locked up in restraints. There would be the ankle, the knee, the waist, the head, the wrist, and the shoulder restraints. And if when that process was happening, if there was almost any resistance at all, the person then would be medicated to a point where they would almost be knocked out.
We had one case where they actually took a patient in a seclusion room and beat him up. Then they lied about it to the services that investigated. So it's a pretty wide range of abuse issues that we've encountered.
Le personnel psychiatrique incite les patients à être violents de façon à pouvoir facturer aux compagnies d'assurance jusqu'à $1,600 par jour pour chaque patient sous contention.
A patient would resist diagnosis, resist treatment, and also want to leave treatment while they were at the hospital. And invariably, every time, that person's situation would be exacerbated until they were put in constraints and medicated, at which point there would be documented reasons to keep that person in treatment.
Le contribuable porte le fardeau de ces traitements sous la forme d'une augmentation importante des primes d'assurance maladie. Pour les victimes, l'expérience est traumatisante, voire fatale.
16-year-old Rochelle Claiborne died in Laurel Ridge's care last August. The state report shows during the restraint, quote, Rochelle stated several times she could not breathe.
In almost all respects, the staff behaved appropriately, followed the standards.
Profitant de lois sur la contention peu restrictives ou vagues, les psychiatres et leur personnel ne sont presque jamais jugés responsables de coups et blessures et de meurtres.
He begged me to take him home, take him out of there, that they were treating him wrongly, and he didn't want to stay there. And I got a call that there had been an accident, that they held him down until he couldn't breathe anymore. I wish I would have listened to him, take him out of there before it had happened. And then I miss him every day. And I wish I could have him back, but I can't.
À ce jour, personne n'a été condamné pour le meurtre de cet enfant. Les personnes âgées sont les principales victimes d'abus psychiatriques. Le traitement des retraités en milieu psychiatrique coûtant aux assurances privées et publiques plus de 29 milliards de dollars par an.
Unwarranted commitment has occurred that wouldn't have occurred if the people hadn't had insurance. The proof of that pudding is generally in how fast they get out once the insurance runs out.
Involuntary commitment is a form of psychiatric slavery, where persons are treated as if they're property and they are deprived of liberty, and people are making money in the process.
As long as we have involuntary mental hospitalization, psychiatry is a prison work. It's a crime against humanity. It is not medicine.
Chaque minute de chaque jour, une personne est internée contre son gré dans un établissement psychiatrique. Et si vous pensez que c'est quelque chose qui ne peut pas vous arriver à vous ou à l'une de vos connaissances, réfléchissez-y à nouveau. Chaque 75 secondes, quelqu'un en Amérique a été interné contre son gré. Avec plus d'1 billion de dollars alloués aux hôpitaux américains depuis 1965, les psychiatres se sont construits pour eux-mêmes une entreprise commerciale lucrative sous le couvert d'une interprétation douteuse de la loi. Mais trop souvent, les psychiatres commettent des crimes trop flagrants pour être ignorés.
The FBI has raided the headquarters of one of the nation's largest operators of psychiatric hospitals.
Hundreds complained of overbilling, misdiagnosed conditions, and insurance fraud.
Investigators say they found more than 5,000 similar cases in all 50 states.
Psychiatrists clearly are getting rich.
Psychiatrists traded drugs for sex, filed false insurance claims, and exploited patients sexually.
We have uncovered some of the most elaborate, aggressive, creative, deceptive, immoral, and illegal schemes being used to fill empty hospital beds with insured and paying patients.
Chaque psychiatre fait le serment d'adhérer à un code de conduite éthique. Considérer le bien-être de ses patients avant tout. Mais de toutes les disciplines médicales, la psychiatrie connaît le plus grand nombre d'escroqueries et d'abus.
Psychiatry is almost a license to print money. If a doctor were clever enough, and many of them are, there's no reason that they couldn't make at least $500,000 a year fraudulently and get away with it in psychiatry.
I don't purport to have deposed every psychiatrist in Las Vegas. I can tell you for a fact I haven't. Maybe I've deposed half. And by and large, they were a dishonest, deceitful, lying bunch of people.
Les méthodes de facturation trompeuses et criminelles des psychiatres sont si répandues que les enquêteurs d'assurance ont des expressions pour en parler, telles que le « hello à la va-vite » ou encore la poignée de main à $100.
$100 handshake is when usually a patient is institutionalized. Psychiatrist, psychologist will visit that person, shake hands with them, say, hello, I'm Dr. So-and-so, I'm taking care of your problem here, and then leaves.
They might have 10 or 20 patients there. They bill an hour for each one, and they might be in the hospital for a total of 30 minutes. So 20 patients, 20 hours, and they'd send the bills off to Medicaid.
We see that most of the victims of recovered memory therapy were women who had excellent health insurance, whether it was government insurance or private insurance, because many insurance policies wouldn't pay for this kind of long-term nonsense. So those people were targeted because of the nature of the insurance that they had.
Chaque année, la psychiatrie américaine escroque le gouvernement et les assurances privées de 40 milliards de dollars par tous les moyens possibles pour tromper le public.
There were some advertisements, very seductive advertisements for people wanting to lose weight and were having problems losing weight. And they would be given all expenses paid to go to a particular spa. But when they got to this spa and went in and signed in, it wasn't a spa, it was a psychiatric center. And then they couldn't get out.
What instead they received massive doses of mind-altering drugs, and they were kept for a lengthy period of time, and their insurance carrier was billed tremendous amounts of money for something that was unnecessary.
Mais les psys mentent non seulement dans leur établissement, mais aussi au tribunal, disant n'importe quoi pour percevoir leur prime de témoin.
A psychiatric expert who will have one opinion in one scenario and a completely opposite opinion in another scenario based on which law firm or governmental agency is paying for his time.
The psychiatrist, on one hand, will tell the public that suicide can be prevented, but will go into court and tell a jury that suicide cannot be prevented. And then once you show his prior inconsistent statements, you also show that he is paid very well by pharmaceuticals, then the jury says, you know what, we're not so sure about you because you just lied to us.
À leur avidité, malhonnêteté et avarice s'ajoutent leurs délits sexuels. Si les psychiatres ne représentent que 6% du corps médical en Amérique, ils commettent le tiers des délits sexuels perpétrés par des médecins.
It has happened so often that by the mid-80s, the insurance companies who insure physicians across America started writing sexual claims out of the policies altogether. That's how common it was.
The system was so broken that more than 25,000 complaints had been registered, but nothing acted upon. When a psychiatrist has a patient, a female patient, and abuses them sexually, there's a very high probability they'll get away with it.
I've seen many cases where the mental health professional becomes very disturbed and is using very strange and odd treatments, and that can go on for many years with no one finding out about it because it's not very public. It's quite private. Things happen behind closed doors.
Malheureusement, leurs délits sexuels impliquent souvent des enfants. Par exemple, le docteur Markham Berry était à première vue un habitant très respecté de son quartier. Mais cette image a volé en éclats lorsqu'il a été arrêté pour attentat à la pudeur sur des enfants. Des quantités incroyables de matériel pornographique avec des enfants ont été trouvées chez lui, et l'enquête qui a suivi a révélé ses abus sexuels sur d'anciens patients. Des garçons de 7 à 17 ans qu'il photographiait et sodomisait. Cela a constitué ce que l'État a appelé les 50 ans d'aventures sexuelles effrénées et cachées de Berry avec des enfants. Il ne s'agit pas d'un cas isolé. Ce trait soigneusement dissimulé se retrouve typiquement chez les membres de cette profession. Dans chaque ville, chaque région, chaque pays, vous trouverez des psychiatres qui commettent des viols, abus sexuels, meurtres et escroqueries. Et comme vous allez le voir, toute la crédibilité de la psychiatrie repose sur la plus grande escroquerie de toutes.
I was diagnosed with a chemical imbalance, manic depression.
They diagnosed me with having ADD.
He told me I had conduct disorder,
ADHD,
mild depression,
Major depression,
manic depressive,
borderline personality disorder, compulsive disorder,
anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia,
ADHD, sleep disorder,
identity problem disorder.
There's no such thing as mental disorder. A mental disorder is whatever someone says it is, and if the person saying this is a mental disorder has enough power and influence, then people believe, oh, that's a mental disorder.
Mais l'autorité ou l'influence ne vont pas sans crédibilité. Aussi, la psychiatrie fabrique sa propre crédibilité.
It's based on a grab bag of checklists for disorders that are published in a book called the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. There are no statistics in this book, by the way. That just makes it sound more scientific.
They create this cluster of disease, and they get together and they vote. Is this a disease? All in favor, say aye.
It's marketed as a scientifically based document. Now, the American Psychiatric Association, which publishes the DSM, do a lot of work to create an aura of scientific precision around the DSM, but it's not scientifically based.
Depuis la première édition du manuel diagnostique et statistique, DSM, le nombre de troubles mentaux votés et ajoutés à ce manuel psychiatrique est monté à 374. Et chaque fois que les psychiatres inventent un nouveau trouble mental, ils trouvent un autre moyen de tromper le public.
If you have 27 ways to bill in the DSM, that's 27 ways to bill. If you have 300, that's 300 ways to bill. So you can pretty much find anyone walking on the street that could fit into a DSM somehow.
When you build insurance companies, you can't say the word. You've got to send in a number. And they have numbers for the most ridiculous things. You know, like arguing with your mother or peeing in the bed.
Adolescent rebellion disorder is an official psychiatric diagnosis. Arithmetic learning disorder is an official psychiatric diagnosis. General anxiety disorder is a recent diagnosis.
For each one, there is a 5-digit code with a decimal point. Now, the implication of that is if I have illness 403.16, that's different in some important and scientifically proven way from someone who has 403.17. And nothing could be further from the truth.
Aussi incroyable que cela soit, si les psychiatres présentent le DSM comme un ouvrage scientifique, ils admettent ouvertement qu'il n'a aucun fondement scientifique.
We have no diagnostic reliable markers for almost any illness there is in the DSM.
What we're testing for in psychiatry, it's hard to say because there's nothing specifically.
But as far as a test that's clinically useful, basically we're not there yet.
We don't have any laboratory tests that we can use to determine whether somebody does or doesn't have a mental illness.
There are no good biological tests for detecting mental illness.
There is no test, there's no biopsy you can do.
There is no chemical test right now.
There are no specific tests to confirm the diagnosis or show the improvement, like any blood tests or any x-rays or anything like that.
Oh, in my practice I don't do any tests. I just speak with people and listen to them, and then I make a decision in what kind of illness.
Ces diagnostics sont complètement différents d'un psychiatre à l'autre. Une personne équipée d'une caméra cachée a consulté différents psychiatres en se plaignant des mêmes symptômes.
I'm extremely unorganized, and I didn't used to be. It's caused problems in the family. It's caused problems getting, I'm self-employed.
So you've got ADD, ADHD, and you're depressed, and your depression is bipolar depressed.
If you have a brain chemistry disorder, it's probably genetic.
You have a lot of the symptoms of depression.
So it seems like it is a mixed picture. What that means is like we got some depressive symptoms and some, high symptoms.
If you're bipolar, I'll need to give you a mood stabilizer. We don't know. I kind of doubt it.
It's considered low-grade bipolar.
You are more of the ADD than ADHD.
And as far as medications for depression, because I would recommend that you start a medication, which are Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Celexa.
Usually Propylene XR is pretty good.
I'll give you some Lexapro in the morning and some Trazodone at night.
Lamictal is a better medication for that. It works on your depression also.
But the treatment for any bipolar cycling is the same. Lithium.
Remeron is another one.
Trazodone.
Segradol.
Wellbutrin.
Lexapro.
Lamictal.
Equitroid.
Depakote.
Lithium.
Ambien.
You may need an antidepressant also with your Lamictal.
We don't know if I give you a medication if it is going to work or not.
To a certain degree, it's trial and error.
You never know if it's the right drug.
How many people have I cured? Well, there are no real cures right now in psychiatry.
I have cured none of my patients.
We're always challenged by our lack of knowledge.
In fact, we don't know what the causes of mental illness are.
Most mental illnesses, we do not know the cause.
Of course, it would be nice to know exact reasons of disorders, but maybe in the future.
I'm the Director of Research at the American Psychiatric Association. We don't